right. Hello and welcome back. Amber here, and today I have enlisted the help of two very good friends of mine and YouTubers, Laura from A Brick Without a Wall and Christian from Christian's Hobby Blog. And today the topic is going to revolve around some of the fantasy series that captivate us, maybe we like, maybe some we don't like, and some of the themes and concepts that make them beloved or maybe not so beloved. I think we're probably going to stick with the works of J.R.R. Tolkien, Robert Jordan, George R.R. Martin, and Andrzej Sapkowski. And I think the first place I wanted to start off on was the themes that really pull us in and hook us in, and what are the types of stuff within fantasy and these series in particular that kind of grab you and make you want to read.
Okay, I was like, I'm ready to jump in.
Go for it.
Anything with a look, if it has a medieval visual to it in a show, I'm trying at least 3 or 4 episodes. But as far as in books and things like that, I look more for heavy fantasy with magic, mythical creatures especially. Hence why I love The Witcher so much. It's half mythical creatures. I love it. I tend to avoid, though, heavy undertones of religion, things like that. Too much police interference. No, thank you.
What grabs me is definitely magic systems for me. I really loved discovering Brandon Sanderson because that was kind of the big point in modern fantasy that I think is when we really started to see magic-focused stories. Okay. And I'm also a sucker for prophecy. I love trying to figure out who the chosen one is and who's the bad guy. One of my favorites is for sure George R. R. Martin with that regard, because we still don't have the answers. So we are still finding new possibilities through who the Fisher King is, or what is the true meaning of Winterfell is. Is that where Winter falls? All these different things. So I love figuring out prophecies, destiny, and also plot beats later on, where rereading it is rewarding. Rereading is actually what I love doing too. So when I see there's a lot of mystery going on, I love that because I'm like, ooh, I can't wait to see if I've been catching all the Easter eggs or foreshadowings. So
Yeah.
in Wheel of Time, I think is the best for that. I guess pacing too hooks me in. I don't want to dilly-dally too long in the outside village and the 2 rivers.
Same.
Let's get going.
Things that both of you had said that really grab me too. I like these in-world mythologies where it's this world has a real in-depth history, and you can tell that it feels like there's been a lot of attention to the world building, and it has its own history and it has its own creatures, and I don't want to say religions, but cultures maybe. I don't like it when a story is so monolithic where it's every single person in this world acts like this and follows the same customs and blah, 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 because I don't feel like that's very realistic. But with what Laura said, yes, I love some weird creatures. I think that's probably where my love of sci-fi kind of comes in and meets with fantasy. But at the same time, Kristen, you said prophecy, and I have a very love-hate relationship with prophecy and fantasy because
Agreed.
I'm going to give Wheel of Time as an example because at the very beginning, you've got this big prophecy, right? The dragon reborn is going to break or save the world. And I, for not even a second, believed that the hero character was going to flip at the end or anywhere throughout the story. I was like, no, this isn't a story like that. I can already tell, Robert Jordan, you're not duping me. This guy is not going to turn into some evil person. When prophecy is done well and it can kind of pull you in and maybe trick you or maybe push you in one direction and then give you whiplash because you overlooked something, that's when I find it really interesting. with George R. R. Martin, I'm almost leaning into the fact that all of his prophecy is just like a dupe, that none of it will even mean anything, really. Like it's going to be just completely different than what not the reader expects, but what the characters expect. If we ever get an end, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see.
Martin better start writing that skeleton because he's getting old.
Quaith,
He better have a skeleton and a
right?
ghostwriter ready to
Quaith,
go.
who's Quaith?
Does anybody feel like the prophecy element of A Song of Ice and Fire is not as prevalent as in other series?
I don't know. I think, well, at least with the ones that we're talking about today, you guys are much more well versed in The Witcher than I am. And Lord of the Rings, like, that is something that I liked when I was young, like a child young. I'm not as, like, well versed into it as I am in A Song of Ice and Fire and The Wheel of Time.
I would say I'm the least well versed in Wheel of
Yeah.
Time, but also not super well versed in Tolkien's writings because I've never read anything of his, but I have spent numerous hours researching the
Yeah.
lore of everything. I can't stop. It's
And I think
delectable.
all three of us have seen all of the adaptations for each author's series that I listed previously, right?
Yeah, I had to
Yeah,
think about
okay.
it,
Absolutely.
but haven't finished House of the Dragon.
I didn't need to think. I was like, check. Seen them all
Well,
multiple
House of the Dragon,
times.
that's Fire and Blood. I'm not really going to be talking about that much, I don't think, unless we want to talk about dragons. But we can talk about dragons, the utmost of mythical creatures.
I actually didn't, I did not include House of the Dragon dragons in my dragon presentation for
Tell me
today.
about your dragon presentation.
Well, what I did is I went through and started looking at how each series represents dragons, where dragons fall, how they're created, what they represent. And we had talked about this morning finding the Terrakins. Is that
Rockin'
what
and
they're called?
Torakin in the Wheel of Time. That's the only
Raken,
like
Terrakins.
dragon-like creature in the Wheel of Time.
But as you were saying, like nobody's like, hey,
Right.
there's a dragon. So, and I didn't really know how they came to be. But in A Song of Ice and Fire, in Lord of the Rings, like the dragons of Middle Earth, and in The Witcher, all dragons are tied to the embodiment of magic. So in The Witcher, they are the living embodiment of chaos. In Lord of the Rings, they were created by Morgoth through magic. And in A Song of Ice and Fire, they're bonded by magic, fire, and blood. So they all kind of have like very similar leanings with one another. I'm going to add in just because that the dragons of Middle Earth are my favorite dragons, Smaug especially. He's my favorite. Here, there's a lot of backstory on
That's
Smaug too.
interesting because in the
But
Wheel of Time, even though the dragon isn't like a literal dragon, it's a human, the dragon reborn, the dragon is potentially the most powerful magic user. There is that association
okay, that
with
does actually
magic.
apply. Yeah. Of course, they're like hyper intelligent, sentient beings in all three series. In The Witcher, if there's different classes of dragons, in the gold dragons like Villain Trettenmirth, he's a polymorph because he comes from Zircania, which they're like dragon
Can you
gods
explain
there.
what a
So he's
polymorph
a
is
god
for
in
someone who
Zircania.
doesn't understand?
He can take the shape of anything he
Okay.
chooses, even human.
Ooh.
So you see him like if you've seen The Witcher or read it, like you see him as three jackdaws in season one, and he's traveling with two Zircanian women, and everybody seems to assume that he had the money to fund hiring Zircanians. They're like the ultimate bodyguards you can hire. But really it's because they worship him as a god. He plays a huge role in Zircanian culture, and that's why they travel everywhere
I
with
like
him.
that. I like that attention to
Yeah.
I like the connection between the mythology and the magic and the world building in that way.
Yeah. But the rest of the dragons of The Witcher are not like dragon gods or dragon lords. They're just different dragons from different areas. Most of the time, their coloring is actually determined by the area in which they thrive in. Like the green dragons and the rock dragons thrive in arid climates. You have white dragons living in the northern waste. gold dragons are mostly only going to be seen around Zircania, which is why everybody thinks that they're an extinct myth. I don't know if this is true, but I get the idea that there's probably only one golden dragon at a time, seeing as how they're more of
Ooh,
like a god figure. It just would make sense to me that there could only be
if there
one
were two, it
at a
feels like
time.
they would be vying for power.
Right. And then you have like the red dragons there, and you have black dragons, which are brown. But in Lord of the Rings, it's not so much necessarily a color. You have a bunch of different colors, but also a different subspecies of dragons. You have great worms, you have drakes, and then you have the hybrids like that Morgoth created, which were the flying dragons who could breathe
And the
fire. And then when we get to A Song of Ice and Fire, you have three subspecies of dragon as well, which Martin didn't actually name his, but you have kind of like the worms, the drakes, and then the hybrids, which are the flying, the ones like Drogon and Balerion.
Christian, how far are you through
So it was
House of the
nice.
Dragon? Like you've seen all the dragons, right?
I've seen episode one, but I just
Oh, that's it.
I think I've lost. I don't want to say I've lost motivation, but I haven't read Fire and Blood. When that was announced, I was like, okay, but when's the winter, you know? And I was like, I'm not gonna buy when's or Fire and Blood until we get Winds of Winter, and I'm still sitting here like I would like to read Fire and Blood. I mean, I really love the politics and the dragons and all that, and I love Damon's backstory that we get throughout the A Song of Ice and Fire stories. But I don't know, it's good. I love the dialogue. I love the character interactions. I love drama, but I don't know.
I do not care if this makes me basic at all, but when it came on, I was like, yeah, I'm kind of just like hanging out, waiting to see the dragons because I want to see what the artistic rendition of each one is. And I wanted to see if they were a little bit less monolithic than Danny's dragons, where they have like different personalities and different looks and stylings. And I love Damon's dragon, the wormy boy. Like he was pretty cool just because he looked so much different than the others. But Rhaenys dragon, I also really liked because it gave me like old school Godzilla vibes with like the big barrel chest. And I was like, ooh, like that's hitting like this. It's hitting the like kaiju itch that I have in the back of my head where I'm like, oh, that one looks cool.
No, you're
Yeah,
fine.
I really like dragons a lot. I think because I did grow up on kaiju movies and Power Rangers, because I see all these humans, it's like, oh, one dragon breath and they're gone. But them being able to master that or getting the Voltron thing and actually being able to combat these forces, I really loved that growing up. And I guess that's why I still enjoy dragons. I never really thought about it, the kaiju connection.
I love them. I think mine's a little bit different. Seeing as how, like, all three of Daenerys' dragons were descendants of Balerion, of course, they're all going to look
Hmm.
kind of similar. But I definitely wanted to see what interpretations they did past that. And I love the dragon aspect of House of the Dragon. But I think why I like dragons so much, Daenerys actually sums up very well in the books when she says a dragon is not a
Ooh,
slave.
yeah.
And I love that they cannot be mastered. Even Morgoth struggles to master Galurong. He leaves, goes out when he's not supposed to. He was put in timeout for 200 years for that, but even Morgoth can't hold like complete control over his dragons. They still are going to do what they want to do. And I love that about them.
I think there's, I don't know, yeah, there's that wild nature about them. But I think that's why I like creatures so much in fantasy and sci-fi
Oh,
as well,
same.
because I don't know, humans can be for the most part kind of predictable. For me, it's easy to kind of like puzzle people out and where I can say like, okay, like this person that's not in their personality. They're not going to be doing this stuff. And unless, there's an outside force like forcing someone into a really hard decision, it seems often enough that it's kind of easy to decide where that person is going to land on a decision. But when you add like weird animals or creatures into the mix, you're like, I have no idea. Like, do these creatures have like a culture within themselves? What is their society like? How do they act? How do they think? What do they feel? And to me, I think that's so much harder to write. I know Laura hasn't read Brandon Sanderson, Christian has, but I really liked the Khandra in Mistborn for that reason
Yeah.
specifically. People are like, "Oh, like who's your favorite character in Mistborn?" I'm like, "I don't care. I don't care for any of the characters really." A lot of people like Sazed. He's like a L for me. Not a fan at all. Boring, predictable. But the Khandra, these things, like, oh yeah, like I was all about it. That was probably my favorite part because I'm like, what are they? You know, you have that part of your brain where you're like, what? Okay, okay.
I love how The Witcher writes the creatures because a lot of them are sentient and I able to have dialogue. And I think the Witcher series has the best dialogue that I've ever read, in fantasy at least, because it's
Agreed.
like dozens
Agreed.
of pages in a row of just dialogue. And you get so much history, you get so much attitudes from each creature. One of my favorite characters in the later books was the vampire. I forgot his name, but I will. Yes, Regis. I
Regis.
loved how he just kept coming in and out of the story, and no one knew that he was coming in and out the story because he would just fly away as a vampire bat, and no one knew he was a vampire. And it's amazing.
For a
Like
long
four
time.
books.
It took Geralt
Yeah.
a minute. It took Geralt a second to puzzle that out. Regis is one of the few characters that can really talk to Geralt in a way that no one else gets to. Like the way Regis speaks to Geralt, even when Geralt tells him to stop, Regis is like, stop it. I'm going to say it anyway. Geralt, settle down. I love it. I love the way that he can like reach in with Geralt and be like, please think about this. Like, I know you don't like it, but I still would like you to think about it.
Is he
Yeah,
more of
Regis is
like
great.
a
Oh, he's a
okay, but
full-fledged
he likes to
vampire.
give advice or he kind of likes to put Geralt in his place or both?
No, Regis is just
Okay.
incredibly old. So imagine like so you know how you and I have talked about like the one of the things I really enjoy about dragons is that hyper intelligent and sentient beings, they live in these enormous spans of life. That's why they're always so mocking about humans and their like frivolity with time. But Regis is more similar to a dragon in that aspect, minus like all of the homicidal
Okay.
urges and the greed. Regis spends a lot of his time helping
Oh, I
others,
like that.
like helping the villagers in the villages that he lives near, showing up to help Geralt when he needs it, that kind of thing. There's 10 different subspecies of
Oh,
vampire in The
nice.
Witcher.
Okay. You guys are really selling me on this.
The mythological creatures of The Witcher are 100-fold other. Like he doesn't just use a parent group of mythological creatures. He takes every group and then splits them down into separate subcategories of the same class of mythological creature. I love it. The bestiaries on Netflix
Let
are
me, okay.
phenomenal.
I want to segue here because all of these four
Let's do it.
authors that we're talking about for the most part have all had adaptations. What would you say are like the highs and lows of the adaptations that you've seen for these series?
I wish Netflix or HBO had picked up Wheel of Time. They do better jobs with fantasy series as it stands right now. Netflix, especially. Honestly, I really wish Netflix had picked up the Wheel of Time. I feel like they would have given it a more appropriate budget and a more detailed focus than Amazon is. Amazon is still, I would say, still pretty early stage of their own series that are being created compared to the other megalith corporations of like HBO, who's always done a lot of phenomenal work, and then Netflix, who does a lot of phenomenal work. But Netflix is really standing out in the fantasy realm to me. As far as the adaptations go, I think that it's a lot of like what you and I have talked about. I think that as a whole, they're doing a really good job considering the amount of material that they're trying to put into, unfortunately, 8 episodes when it should be 12. I'll die on the
Same.
hill of that. But as far as my favorite adaptation goes, each one is different from its written story in certain ways. I like show Geralt better than book Geralt.
I agree.
That may not be popular, but show Geralt is not corny. And book Geralt, due to the time period that he was written in, there are some corny things that like wouldn't have been corny in the 90s, but are corny in the 2020s. Like they just are. And show Geralt kind of smooths that out. I think that Game of Thrones in its first season was a masterpiece of unparalleled proportion up until that time. That was a groundbreaking first season. I love the book so much. I had to start looking at the show and the books as two separate entities. That way I could continue to enjoy the visuals of the books because I still wanted to see how they creatively interpreted the story and the landscape mostly, and especially the dragons. I was not going to stop watching after season 2 when I watched it derail from the books because I'm not going to miss out on the dragons. Tolkien's work is magic in its film adaptations. Like it's just living magic. There is nothing unenjoyable about the visuals of anything I've watched from Tolkien's works. I enjoy the stories. As far as reading them, they're a little on the wholesome side for my taste. I want to know so much more about Morgoth. I want to know. I'd watch a movie about just the Witch King of Angmar. I would totally do that. Wheel of Time, though, I'm really excited for
Same.
season 2. Mostly because of you, Amber. Mostly because of you. I can't wait to see Perrin become, like, however he communes with these wolves. I'm so excited.
We
So
messed up with
excited.
season one. It's coming though. It's coming any day now, right?
I picked up on it as soon as I saw those wolves, like, pacing around behind him. I was like, what is going on with him and these wolves? And then his eyes flashed yellow, and I was like, oh, he's in some state, like he's in some sort of commune with these wolves. Does he morph,
He
or is that
doesn't
not a thing?
morph, but he's
I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that.
uh
Like,
there can be like a mind morph though. Like some people get trapped in like a never-ending like wolf life and they just become fully like feral humans that run around on all fours and you have to just kind of let them go. They are no longer human. So that sucks.
oh, wait, they like run around on all fours. They
Yeah, like
become very
they in
canine.
their
Okay.
mind become a wolf.
Got it.
But Christian, adaptations, how are you feeling in this day and age?
Well, I'm really
It's okay. You
happy.
don't have to hold back. You don't have to hold back.
Yeah, I'm really
Yeah,
happy
don't
that
hold
we're getting
back.
something on the TV because, I mean, I was, I think, 5 or 6 when Fellowship of the Ring, the movie, came out. And that was sort of my first fantasy movie that I'd ever seen. That really blew me away, and I was like, oh, I want more fantasy, and nothing else came. We had Golden Compass, which was a flop. We had many other series that were flops, and now we're seeing this reemergence of interest in fantasy that I'm really enjoying. And the big difference that I'm having between Lord of the Rings and Wheel of Time and all that is that Netflix and HBO give the directors and the showrunners a lot of space to do what they want. And the issues that I'm having with Amazon is that they're like, our market analysis told us we have to have this and this and this. And it's like, get out of their way. Get out of Rafe's direction and let him do the magic because hearing Rafe talk about what he wanted to do, a 2 hour first episode and 10 episodes, and you cannot do 8 episodes for a fantasy show. Maybe for a drama, maybe for a comedy, anything. But I think back to the days of Breaking Bad, where it was 20 something episodes for an entire season. And they're not doing that for fantasy. Like, yes, you won't make as much money in the short term, but I think long term, they should have these 20 episode seasons for Wheel of Time. I want to see Baelon. I want to see the Four Kings. I want to see Whitebridge. I want to see everything. And I'm totally fine with changes, by the way. I'm not a book cloak and whatsoever. I had to separate A Song of Ice and Fire from Game of Thrones, I think, after season 4, because I was like, oh, this is great TV. I love it. But I'm starting to see it kind of separate. And I have to do my due diligence to make sure I'm not super disappointed and just getting worse and worse, in my opinion. But it was nice to see fantasy. It was nice to see Danny's dragons carpet fire breathing caravans, and that's what I've been wanting to see on screen for so long. And we're getting that now, but the substance is just not there anymore. It's all aesthetics. And Lord of the Rings, I think, is the best example of that, where the movies were really good and really nailed all of that, but the TV show is just the visuals that I like, nothing else. I do like the Harfoots though, but that's just because it reminds me of the Shire. So,
Right?
What you were talking about with Lord of the Rings, like I had said with Wheel of Time, I wish somebody else had won that contract. The moment I read that Amazon won the Lord of the Rings contract, I was like, uh. But it is like exactly like Christian was speaking about HBO. Another thing real quick was I think that Game of Thrones really changed the landscape of of fantasy inside of visual media, because Game of Thrones opened the door for the rest of these series to later become
Here's the thing.
adaptations. Because now they know, their little analysis reports say people will watch
Yeah.
it.
Here's the thing with Game of Thrones that I think did so much better than Wheel of Time or Rings of Power. I think their budgeting was much more creative. Like Wheel of Time and Rings of Power, I mean, Rings of Power especially, they had like boatloads of cash. Like they just threw mad money at them. Like here is billions of dollars, but we're kind of gonna like tell you what we want with it. Okay? Where Game of Thrones, like we had a lot of these set locations that were just so creatively done in a way not to spend all of the money. Like a lot of these camp tents where you're just kind of like off on a field somewhere and they construct like a tent, and then you have a scene where it's like Tywin like gutting a deer and having this monologue where it was done so smart. Like they didn't have the money to do these big castle scenes or these giant, CGI lingering panning shots where you're, getting this majestic like flyover of these cities for minutes and stuff like that, where with Rings of Power, like you can tell how much money they put into it because the visuals are beautiful, gorgeous. Wheel of
Oh,
Time,
they're
their
beautiful.
budget got hampered by the fact that they had to stop and start filming, I think, three different times because of the pandemic, and then they had to rewrite part of the story. So, like, flying people around multiple times and sending them home and getting everyone back to set and back home, like you're going to take a big chunk of your budget out by that. But at the same time, if you could give shows like this more episodes, I wouldn't care about CGI so much. I wouldn't care so much about the visuals because I think with other series that have had much smaller budgets, they've made it work and I've been impressed. So it doesn't have to be Rings of Power visuals for me to be top tier.
Look at Shadow and Bone.
Their costumes,
Micro budgets compared to the rest.
costumes and
Micro
sets
budgeting
were
compared to the
great
rest.
considering like how much money they spent on that.
Love
And if a
them.
show like that can do it, then I mean, why not? Why not give people more episodes and allow that room to breathe with the world building? Like, give us the story. Like, that's what the fantasy fans love. They want the stories that they've read, that they have that emotional attachment to. So it's so hard. It's so hard to be a fantasy fan, even though I'm so happy and overjoyed to get adaptations. But I'm like, oh, like, what are they doing? Oh, like, be careful, be careful. And Netflix, I love Netflix, but I'm always scared that, they're the streaming platform where they buy something, you get 3 seasons, they dump it. Like, you never know what's going to stay on Netflix, where I'm like, oh, loved that show. Oh, like that season just comes out, and then they're like, oh, yeah, we're not doing a season two. And you're like, "Oh, why am I even watching this? Cool, thanks."
I think with Netflix, they have such like high standards for shows being picked up season after season. Obviously, they're going to carry The Witchers. You can tell by what they're doing. They have a whole like world of The Witcher page that they've made tons of media for. But there was another series called Altered Carbon that I really loved that's super
That was
sci-fi
great.
and dystopian. And I was so surprised when they canceled it after season two.
Another thing that these studios need to do is give these showrunners time in the beginning, like New Line Cinema gave to Peter Jackson. They gave him 3 years before they even went onto set to start filming. They built all the props. They figured out all the costumes. They did all of that, made it, tested it, made sure it looked good on camera, and then they started shooting. They don't do that. I think what we see now, especially with like Wheel of Time, we got the announcement, and 2 years later we got it, and now we're sitting here 3 years looking like before we get season two. And it's like, okay, well, you could have done all the work that you've done after season one, put it before season one, really make sure that everyone's on the right page or the same page at least. And that's one thing that I'm really getting bothered by nowadays. That they're not putting any time into this. They're like, okay, we got the property, we got to do something right now to make
We
back our
ha
money.
we have the IP, now milk it, cash it.
That's how
Yeah.
Star Wars was for me. I mean, I really enjoyed it, but I was like, they're moving way too fast. Like, give us because I think Disney bought it, and 10 months later we had the first movie. It was rushed out. I mean, it was great. I loved it, but they just need to think long term. I don't know why no one does that. It drives me crazy.
Well, I think with Disney, it's,
I would like to say Netflix isn't Disney.
yeah,
Yeah.
Disney is all about the product
They
placement.
don't
Like, that's where they
Hmm.
make all their money, selling little baby
Disney
Yodas and stuff.
Disney has like they have a formula that they have
It's so
perfected.
formulaic.
They know
Hmm.
how it's
Everything.
so formulated, but look, it
Yeah.
works for them. I'm not mad at them. I've enjoyed much of what Disney has done with Star Wars, but I agree completely with what you guys are saying about what Netflix does.
1899, that was canceled before the end of season one. Like, okay. The
That
one
so
sci-fi
bums
show I
me out.
really loved. I
That bums
was
me
really
out.
enjoying that.
They've done a lot of really good shows that have gotten like the plug pulled. I'm thinking of Sense 8 or The OA. Like The OA was like wildly imaginative. I mean, it was one of the most banana shows I've ever seen. I could not I could not call it ever. I was like, where is this going? Like, I thought it was going one way, and then it was just like, nope, okay, holy crap. Like, what? Okay. Like, that show was incredibly enjoyable for that reason, but I guess, not enough people liked it, so they cut it. But, uh,
I always wonder what pushes like I always wonder what the threshold for Netflix is to give a show another season. I would really like to know what their thresholds look like. And my biggest issue with Amazon and their shows is they treat it like Amazon Prime. Like they treat everything like it's Amazon Prime. When they bought the rights to The Rings of Power, Jeff Bezos was talking about how this was going to be his personal project and he wanted it out in the first year and then COVID hit, so it took a couple of years. But like Christian was saying, they rushed Wheel of Time out. Are we going to wait 2 or 3 years for the next Rings of Power as well, because that was also
I mean, we're
rushed
coming
out?
up on 2 years
Like, who
since
knows?
season one of Wheel of Time came out, which is wild. I mean, they did the same thing with Game of Thrones there in the later seasons, but again, like it's these like big budget where so much of the time goes to CGI and stuff where it's like making us wait for all the movie magic. Okay, so I could probably talk about this for hours, but I do want to talk
Oh, I
maybe
could.
we'll make this like a thing, like keep coming back, once a month or something.
I'm down
Okay.
because I love this.
So, reader preferences, character focus versus story focus, and character-led narrative being where the focus is generally on the thoughts and the feelings of the character and what's driving them, what their decision-making process looks like, and then plot-driven narratives where it's the actions and outward occurrences that are kind of driving things and pushing people and things to unfold in a way that it does. So,
Preferably, our favorite stories have both character focus and also heavy story focused aspects of it. But for me, I love, love, love character focused stories where they drive the plot. Wheel of Time is a very good example of this, where every decision, every line of dialogue someone says has an effect, and it's very slow at first to see the cause and effect of what's going on in the Wheel of Time, but you see it proliferating by the final three books that Brandon Sanderson did. He is tying off everything. It's so awesome. But I really love getting to know all these characters and learning the histories, the life experiences. Uh, Even if the bad guys, I love reading everybody. I think George R. R. Martin especially is really good at writing characters. That's what got me into fantasy again, because I was only reading Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit over and over again. But George R. R. Martin got me really into the character focused stuff because I love to see the interactions between these characters that have nothing in common with each other. And I mean, the best rivalry ever is Peter Baelish versus Barris. I mean, everybody loves when they show up together on screen, both in the books and on the TV show, but especially the TV show, because they work so well off of each other, and especially when George R. R. Martin was writing the dialogue, because he knew the characters,
Yeah.
and he just nailed it. And Lord of the Rings is definitely story focused, where the characters are sort of serving their roles and serving the responsibilities. You have Aragorn, who's the king in exile, who's going to come back for his crown. And in the books, he has it like instantly, and it's kind of like, oh, okay. But you also have Frodo, the unwilling hero, who doesn't really want to do it, and that's just so interesting to me. Learning everything there is to a character, and it drives me crazy when they die before we can really fully explore them.
I think that was big
You really summed up.
one
Yeah.
of the big exciting things about Game of Thrones too, because well, Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones, because you're like, oh, like really love this character. I can't wait to see what they're gonna do next. Oh, okay, like they're dead. All right, never mind. George R. R. Martin really does amazing character work. Amazing.
Like, imagine if Khal Drogo
Yeah.
like met up with like I don't know Jon Snow. Like, I love those ideas, and you can kind of get a good idea how that would go because there's so much information that George R. R. Martin gives us about these characters and their attitudes about everything. So I also love that about character focused stories is the theorizing of like, oh, what if Jon Snow met the Cersei Lannister a year before and everyone knew his parentage, like all this stuff. But going off route, but
I think Khal Drogo would have murked Jon Snow. I mean, just put him in the dirt. There is no way without destiny that Jon Snow could outmaneuver Khal Drogo in a physical altercation. Not
And see, Jon
possible.
Snow's like 15 at the
Not
beginning, so
possible.
like,
I hate Jon Snow.
aren't you ready for a sequel series?
I do. I know you're not supposed to say that, but I hate Jon Snow. I don't like
Oh, I hate
Daenerys either. I
Daenerys.
don't like either one of them, and it is why A Song of Ice and Fire isn't my favorite fantasy series, is because of Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen. And I was thinking about that last night. If it weren't for the two of them, that would probably be my favorite
okay.
series. But they are so tropey and so lame. Like, they're so snooze. I'm so tired of them.
I don't know. Like, I don't mind them. Like, they're not necessarily my favorites, but I also, like, I really don't like Arya at all. Like, I feel bad for her. She is a child. She's like a 12-year-old little girl, like, who is completely unhinged and, like, because of the trauma. And I feel like she is so
Agreed.
glorified. Like, yeah, cool. I'm gonna name my daughter Arya because she's a badass and she likes to kill people. And I'm like, no, this is a baby. This is a child. Like, this is not something to glorify here. But I don't know. That's just a
I'm not gonna
personal.
lie. I love her story,
Her
not so much
her
her
story is
character.
great, and I'm always rooting
I
for her.
enjoy
Yeah.
following around. Yeah, I actually, more than anything, I like reading her chapters just because I like what's going on around her. That is where I think some of the most interesting content from A Song of Ice and Fire comes from across the Narrow Sea,
Yeah.
for me at least. That's like when she is in the House of the Faceless Men, incredibly interesting. The show did
They
Arya dirty
did. They
though,
did.
because they took this killing machine and then somehow kept the bonds of family
No.
intact. They wouldn't have made her a faceless man if they could sense the bonds of family being intact. Like, that was, I think that was just done due to this is what the viewers will like. Nobody wants to, like, our viewers don't want to see a kid hate their family and not
Right.
care anymore. But that but with what Christian was saying about it being character focused and story focused, yes, I love that. But I do prefer character focus. I actually also prefer world
Same.
focus. I don't even care about the story. I want the history. And Amber, I think you would like The Witcher because you get a huge dose of
Okay.
far back history. Like the previous elven names for all the cities in the world. And then sometimes even down to the dwarven names for them, which is why I was so surprised when you told me people didn't like Blood
I
Origin.
think what we were talking about it,
It's a
I think we
tiny
were talking
history
about it
show.
on Discord,
That's all
and the
it
main
is.
complaint was that it is not nearly enough time. Is that right? Were you talking about it?
Well, it wasn't even written. It was only 4 episodes. Sapkowski didn't write it. It was written by the Netflix writers. I think that for what they did a phenomenal job. It was like a little short course in history, and what it was meant to do was really kind of bridge some of the gaps that people who are not familiar with the actual Witcher story to bridge everything together for them. Because if you're not super familiar with the story, you're not going to be familiar with the Wild Hunt and what magnitude of presence it has in the universe. Because the only thing you've heard about it is like the common folk being like, I saw the wild hunt over the ridge. It's, the race of war. It's an omen of war. It sounds like peasantry superstition, but it's not. It's not peasantry superstition. It's a big part of the overlying story arc. So Blood Origin was to give a little bit of clarity because season 2 we're going to start like we start getting into Ithilne's prophecies, and then the further in we go the more prophecy weight is carried. And without Blood Origin, a lot of people would be very, I don't want to say behind, but it would take a lot more building without Blood Origin to serve as like a small, hey, watch this. That way you get kind of the background and we don't have to weave it in season 3. It allowed them to take a lot of like excess bulk out.
Christian, was I talking about it with you on Discord? Or was it someone else?
I have not seen it, so
Okay.
I just, I mean,
What?
since it, I
You
do,
love The Witcher.
I don't know. It was since they recasted Henry Cavill, I was like, I don't care anymore. And I love the books, and I have the books, so
Okay, so keep in mind, it's not written by Sapkowski. It's not an
hmm.
adaptation. They took a bunch of information from the books and built a story. Like, I think you might like it. It's all
Okay.
history, though. There is one really nutty character in it.
I knew nothing.
But the heroes of
Yeah, I
it,
knew nothing
they're
about
good.
it. So what you're saying actually interests me, and I might watch it now. Because I saw it and I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, it's from the time of Zintrea. It takes place when it was
Oh well,
still
okay.
Zintrea, like at its height. Yeah.
I'm trying to think if I like character led or plot driven better. I think I might have to go with plot. I love it. Like, obviously, my preferred choice is when there's like a really great mix. But if I can't have like the perfect mix, I sometimes feel like it's a little bit for me too easy to guess on characters' actions. So I need something in the plot to come in and disrupt things. That way it feels new and exciting for me. Where, like, I'm gonna go to the Wheel of Time, but all the characters in the Wheel of Time I feel like are very predictable. Like their character arcs are wonderful, amazing. Nynaeve, mwah, like chef's kiss. That is one of my favorite and I think one of the best character arcs in fantasy that I've read. But for the most part, like we've got your characters like Rand or Jon Snow or I don't know who. Let's go with like a Gandalf character. They all kind of fit in this nice box. You know what I mean? Like you kind of have an idea how they act and what they would do if they were presented with a problem, I guess. And I love when I can be surprised. So I do like really gray characters for that reason because you never really quite know where they're going to land. Peter Baelish, he's a great character because nobody knows what Baelish is doing. Only Baelish knows. The Hound, like,
I actually find, oh, sorry.
I'll just finish this real quick. The Hound I thought was really fun because I thought, okay, he's
No, you're
just
fine.
Joffrey's lackey, right? But then that moment where he's like, fuck the king, I'm out, I was like, oh, okay, like this is getting interesting now. So, like, I love when there can be changes and big changes in the character and it not feel predictable. So like, yeah, I like both, but go ahead, Laura. Sorry.
All I was going to say is I actually find Peter Baelish to be very predictable. If you have a Machiavellian mindset, Baelish is predictable because everything he does is super Machiavellian. And he's thinking roughly like 4 steps further out than anybody else. And he's a big picture thinker, which is why I really, that's the kind of character I like, is big
That's why
picture
I can't put my
thinkers.
finger on what his deal is because I haven't been able to figure out what his big picture is yet. So like he is a giant question mark for me because I don't know like is he only out for himself? Is that it for Peter Baelish? Like power, that's it. Like that's his driving force or is it retribution against like past humiliation because he was in love with Catelyn. Like, what's driving this man? And I'm still not sure. Or is he just like a little bit deranged and wants to end up with Sansa because he was in love with Cat and that didn't work out? So now he's going after the daughter. Like, I don't know what's up with this man. So I think question mark. Interesting.
Does anybody else think that the Catelyn love thing is a weird addition to his personality? Because I don't believe that for a second that that man loves anybody more than the assertion of his wants.
I think
Like, I don't think that he loves people. I think that the Catelyn love arc is super weird. Like, I just don't see how it works. I don't, it's not believable to me. I just don't believe that he feels that for real. I think everything that he does, and I appreciate this about him, is very shadow motive. And that's why I love him as a character. Everything is, I don't think that he wants to sit on the Iron Throne whatsoever. He wants to rule from the shadow because that's where real power is garnered from, is from the shadows. You want to be able to puppeteer the prop.
Yeah, I've always thought that Peter Baelish never has felt love. I think it was more about control. And he could not control
Yeah.
Catelyn and got his ass handed to him. So that is something for
Hmm.
the rest of his life he's going to be bitter about, toxic, everything.
Humiliation.
Yeah. And I think by
Yeah.
yeah,
I could see
so
that.
that's basically was my understanding of it. Because he is, it ain't love driving what he does. It's just greed.
I don't think so. I enjoy
Oh
him
yeah,
as a
he's
character
amazing
though,
to
a
me.
lot.
I think in his own head, he could
I
think
also
it was
enjoy
love.
berries.
Like in his own mind, what he's telling himself, it could be that. But I think it's a power thing for him. It was the idea of him holding power, and he loved that idea of that. And it wasn't like the love of the person, but the love of like the power or the idea or the status. I don't know. That was,
His hubris
yeah,
gets him.
yeah,
It's a very Greek
absolutely.
tragedy type of
Like
character.
most villains, well, most villains, if you think about it, succumb to their own hubris. Even Smaug did,
Oh.
unfortunately. Aw.
Did we come all the way? We came full circle
Like the most
back to dragons.
full circle. I can talk about him. I can relate him to anything, please. But I do think that most really great villains eventually succumb to their own hubris. They gain so much shadowed power, or they have so much overt power that they forget that they could possibly meet psychological matches in adversaries. They always seem to believe that they are so much further ahead of everybody else that they cannot be stopped. And that seems to be where they always lose their lives.
That's why I hate Peter on the show. Because nothing he does after season 4 makes sense to me.
Okay, yeah, show Peter. I don't know. Yeah, like the way that they have him in the show, I don't know either. Like it questions. Now book Peter, like whatever he's got going on in the Vale right now, it is a mystery to me, but I don't know if we'll ever get a conclusion to it. Good old Preston Jacobs is doing that fanfic and the Eerie chapter that he did. It's
It's
so
good.
good. It is so good. And it's
I
not
listen to
just
some of
him,
it.
it's
It's
like
good.
crowdsourced. Like he has like a team of people working on it together. But that Eerie chapter is, whew, it's a good one. It's a good one.
Can I ask you guys a question? And it's going to be very theoretical, but how much information do you think HBO was given, or how far out onto their own island did they get? Because I really struggle with thinking that they have possibly ruined some of the story for me in the worst ways.
Well,
Does anybody else feel worried that like Winds of Winter may eventually come out and it's going to feel like those last final
I,
seasons?
okay, this is my unhinged loony theory, but
It's going to be
I think
unhinged. I
he
can't
already
wait.
had like a big portion ready to go, and he's been furiously back and forth, like rearranging pieces and changing storylines to make it more in line with how he wants. And I'm not saying just to like he's doing this because he didn't like HBO's ending or whatever, but maybe he wants to establish it as his own thing, and maybe the flaws in the HBO ending, like maybe something resonated with him and he's like, nah, like we're gonna switch things up a little bit. So, like, I like to think that he's like switching things up and rewriting and starting from scratch in a lot of places. Because let's be real, like when Dance of Dragons came out, HBO still could have included like characters like young Griff or John Connington, and they chose not to. And without those characters, a lot of the plots don't make sense. So,
I actually had no issues at all with the ending. I love the fact that Bran. I don't like the council at all, by the way. I hated that council.
okay, the
Everything aside from the
council,
council.
yeah. Bran, yeah, that
Okay.
makes
Yeah,
sense.
I
I
love
mean,
the Bran thing of him becoming the, I guess, three-eyed crow and ruling the entire country, and that this has been a multi-century con for Bloodraven. I love
hmm
that ending. The issue is that they packed 3 seasons worth of material in 6 or 7 episodes. If they took their time, I would have loved it.
Agreed.
I would have
for
been
like a
fine.
freaking polar bear zombie. Like, cool.
And also
Cool.
killing the
Look,
Night King before Cersei. Cersei is not the
Bad.
end game boss of the books.
Bad.
It is the Night King. Everybody should have died at Winterfell. They should have gone down to the crossings at Harrenhal and all that. What's that? South End. Yes,
King's Road
they
Crossing?
should have all. Yeah, I think
Is that
so.
what it is? I don't know.
Yeah, that's
I'm
on the
pretty sure.
way. And they got, I think they should have had like a council there where they're like, we need to get to King's Landing now.
No,
And
no,
by this
no.
point in the
Oh,
story, Aegon should have been on the throne. And
Yes.
yes.
Aegon should have been the hero, Targaryen.
Yes.
And Dany would have been pissed off because, oh my gosh, that's my throne. I'm the
Right.
Targaryen. You are not. And Peter Bate or Varys is like, chaos is a ladder. It doesn't matter if he's a king or not. Uh, it just matters what the people think. So screw you, Danny. and she would have gone mad from that. And I love the John
Right.
Connington character so much, and he's very important. I mean, he's the guy who's in has PTSD of bells. That
Mm-hmm.
him not being in the show is an obvious hole, and that's the issue I
Yeah.
have with the ending.
No, I think that totally makes sense. Fagon or young Griff showing up, like he would have been like loved. I think like the people of this world would be like, yeah, like bring him on down. We're ready. Get Cersei out of here. She's a mess.
She
But
just bombed the Vatican. Get her out.
right. Right. Like and everyone's just cool. Like she just destroyed the most holy place in this landscape and people are just like, just another day in Westeros. No, that's not how it works. There should be an uprising. There should be a revolt. But
Can I give an
sure.
unpopular opinion? I
Oh
really
yeah.
enjoy
Love
Cersei
it.
in the later
My God.
segments of the show. Like, I know that she's pretty terrible, but at the same time, I do understand that she really is basically the smartest person in her family aside from Tyrion. And if those two had managed to
Right.
group together, they could have overthrown their father in zero time flat. Too bad they were both too obsessed with having
Right.
daddy love them.
I will say this. This was one of like my biggest, one of the biggest things that I was really disappointed with the show is that we never got to see like Greywater Watch and the Reeds, like Howland Reed.
Yeah.
Like where the hell is this guy? What? Like he is the missing key to all of
Yes.
this and like nothing. And the fact that they have this I mean, like, it is said that they have like a moving castle that no one can find, and it's literally in the swamps of this land. I was like, bet, okay, if HBO, this was before, the last season, but I was like, if HBO is smart, they will make one of the last battles against the Night King, I guess, there in these swamps because, like, for one, it would just look cool to have like zombies and things freezing and swamps and fog and mist and like these creatures trying to like get through this really hard landscape that shouldn't be too easy for them. And I was like, all right, like, take out Winterfield. Like, we move to the next location. Let's go to Greywater Watch. Let's meet Howland Reed. Let's get information from him. Let's figure out all the mysteries. And it's like, no, we're just going to pretend this guy never existed and like never mention him again. Cool. Cool. Okay. Okay. Got it.
I love it though. You guys have both had like I love both of your thoughts about this.
Should we
I
should we
love
go
it.
ahead and wrap it up and do a part two, maybe?
I'm
Down.
down.
Yeah, let's do it. Hold on.
Oh. He agrees. He agrees.
How dare
All
you?
right. Well, I will wrap it up here. And for everyone who's watched till the end, thanks for watching. Let us know your thoughts, opinions. You agree, disagree, you like some of the stuff we said, you hate some of the stuff we said. Let us know, and we will see you back next time.